Hello, everybody. So we got a couple people out here. We'll wait for a couple minutes while people join. Lee, if we can launch the icebreaker question, that'd be great. I want to know what everyone's having for lunch. Leftovers are always good. Burger, salad, chicken salad. All right, very good. Well, we're seeing more people come in. We are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today, talking about some of the ESG reporting landscapes, how the SEC, the new regulation come out, how that could affect you. If everyone would like to put all your questions in the Q&A function, we do have some good time set aside towards the end to answer questions. So put your questions in the Q&A box and we will address them at the end of our presentation today. And moving on, the agenda today, we'll be covering EBI Sustainability and ESG Strategic Advisory Services, what those are, talk a little bit about some of the ESG reporting developments and the trends that I'm seeing, who's impacted by the SEC climate disclosure ruling, and then some of our case studies that we thought that you might find interesting. And for everybody out there, my name is Tara Kopis. I'm the Director of ESG here at EBI. I oversee all of the sustainability and ESG strategic advisory services for the company. I have 23 years of professional experience starting out in the Air Force, overseeing space and aircraft acquisition programs, and moving on for over a decade, consulting and working with some of the largest government contractors out there, and led a couple P&Ls at a couple different companies before shifting into sustainability. And my degrees from CU Boulder. And during that time, I was able to consult with Prologis for a bit, and then work full-time with CBRE and JLL, supporting large investor clients. So that's a little bit about my background. I am joined here today by my colleague, Kyle Sullivan. Kyle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kyle Sullivan. I'm an ESG analyst here at EBI, and I have over 8 years experience working with architectural firms and different commercial real estate firms. I received a master's in environmental law and policy from Vermont Law School. So here at EBI, I oversee our regulatory transition risk team and that program. So I love talking policy.
And yet the SEC talk is going to be covered by Kyle later on in a little bit here. But we will start with just an overview of EBI and ESG Strategic Advisory Services for ESG. So with that, I'd like to see who out there has an idea of who EBI is. Are you a current client? Are you familiar with our services? Do you not know who we are? You just saw my face on LinkedIn and decided to join. All of these polls, by the way, are anonymous. All the Q&A is anonymous. So we're just trying to get a gauge of the audience here and who we're talking to today. So if you don't mind, go ahead and fill out the polls here. Again, they're all anonymous. Let's see. Somewhat familiar is mostly current clients, very familiar. So a lot of good familiarity with EBI here in the audience today. So thank you for that. So for those that may not know, we've been around for 35 years. We have experts all over the United States and 40 states. We do over 30,000 projects a year, all the way across the different service lines that touch on the core capabilities that you'll see here on the right. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat today, so apologies for my voice. We've served and helped access capital from over 500 lenders last year alone, and we helped support 100 portfolios, real estate portfolios in 2023. So a pretty broad range of expertise and experience that comes with EBI. again, we are all over the United States. We've got employees, again, in 40 states. You can see here that we've done projects in every single state in the continental US. Not sure about Alaska or Hawaii, but most of our work is done in the Northeast, with, of course, Florida, Texas, and the West Coast, just along those areas to where we see more, climate risk activities. A lot of the large cities are in the states where you see those darker colors, where we've done a lot of our projects in. But total national coverage across all of our service lines. So going more into sustainability and our ESG coverage, the way that I've been really positioning our sustainability and ESG strategic advisory team that I lead is, we are the mechanics. We will be able to help our clients understand where they can improve, where some of the potential issues are, and bring in all of the expertise and experts from the rest of the company to help to actually fix what needs to be fixed, and use those toolkits that are available to us throughout EBI. So you'll see that underneath the sustainability and ESG strategic advisory box here, it's that policy development, looking at transition risk, doing your gap analysis, the materiality assessments, a lot of those strategy elements, helping develop or understand the different reporting frameworks, reporting to those frameworks, resiliency, and help you communicate out some of the goals that you may have. Moving over, we still have a lot of environmental elements as part of our due diligence, which I think most people understand or think of EBI. They think of us as a due diligence firm. But starting from that due diligence, we help support with ESG checklists, doing green building feasibility and gap analysis, and any IC memo communications. And then the environmental engineering group is really focused on those site level engineering, tactical elements regarding green building certifications, the GHG emissions, doing those energy and water benchmarking and audits that are very, very important in making your buildings operate better, looking at commissioning and retro commissioning, ordinance compliance, and of course, indoor environmental quality to make sure that the tenants, the customers, the clients that occupy the buildings are breathing in good air. And then finally, the climate risk and resiliency aspect, looking at the physical climate risk of a site, doing that property resilience assessment. And that's one of the things that I feel, one of the reasons why I came to EBI was that there's a lot of companies out there that you can buy, a standard climate risk assessment that, has all of the numbers and highlights where the high risk items are, but they don't use any sort of site attributes in consideration with that. So we've got a whole team that could go out on site, look at the site, look at what the attributes are that could help with that resiliency aspect and reduce that climate risk. So those ones that you buy out there online aren't going to be, fully accurate to your specific site, and that's what we can help with. So moving on, I'm sorry, I went a little bit too far. Our advisory service also goes all the way across the asset life cycle, from buying them to operating them, and then if you are at the point in time of dispositioning, marketing those buildings for sale. We are very, very focused on helping with that program strategy and focused on reducing the risk and assuring compliance, reducing operating costs, enhancing the asset, the rental yield value, improving the access to capital, and driving that long-term value creation. We really want to do what makes sense for you and your company, and position you in a better position and incorporate sustainability elements in how you operate your company. And again, what makes sense to you and what really will impact your operations for your specific company. And lastly, before we get into some of the ESG trends, is the key takeaway here is, a lot of people know us as a due diligence firm. There's a lot of consulting and reporting firms out there that do really good work. The strength that comes with EBI is we can support you all the way across through everything. We can hold our teams accountable on doing, on-site services and help you with that strategy, making sure that all of those strategic elements are driven all the way through from the corporate level to the asset level. So that's a differentiator that, is EBI. And one of the reasons, again, why I came to EBI is to provide our clients that full service spectrum of ESG and sustainability related work. So going into some of the sustainability and ESG reporting development, some of the things that I've seen out there. Next slide. I'd like to see out there if your company has a net or how you rate your sustainability and ESG program. From 1 stars being, we've thought about it a little bit, to 5 stars to where you've got a full developed program. You're looking at everything from asset level all the way up to corporate level. How you rate your ESG program. And again, this is all anonymous. Let's see, mostly can't see the results here for some reason, but that's okay. Let's see.
Just creeped up to 3.4 stars.
Yeah, 3.4 around there. I guess that's pretty typical on what we see. There's always room for improvement, so that's great. But looking at ESG, we know that ESG isn't as in vogue as it was last year, a couple of years before. Just surrounding the term of ESG, there's been a lot of flack and discussion around what ESG really means. At the end of the day, though, ESG from our perspective is really making those good business decisions to reduce your risk and making sure that you're operating in a very efficient manner. A lot of companies say that they do that. Again, there's always going to be room for improvement. So from our take, it's ESG or sustainability, whatever term you want to use. The different acronym of today of what's trending is that the element there of looking at risk and increasing operational efficiency, it's not going away. So it's not just the trend. Building risk assessment and mitigation in business operations is really what we're focused on. We still continue to see ESG disclosure mandates ramp up. As we're going to talk a little bit later about the California and SEC regulations. European market is still really, really focused on that. And you may say, well, I don't have buildings, I don't operate in Europe, why do I care? If you're looking for funding, if you're looking for capital, a lot of those European investors are really looking for, US companies to have some sort of ESG or sustainability program in place. So it's really important for you to, again, look at what makes sense for you and, understand what's at risk if you don't do certain things versus another. Next one, the weather's so crazy. So whether you believe it's, anthropogenic or just a, regular weather cycle that we're in, we can change the weather in a very short term. A lot of the stuff that we've been working on is hopefully going to, impact it later down the road. But significant weather events are steadily increasing. Just last year from the article that I found, 25 significant weather and climate disaster events where losses surpass $1 billion. So making sure that your properties and sites are resilient and can, resist those crazy weather events is going to be important from an insurance perspective and an operating perspective. And then lastly, one of the things that I've seen in a lot of the research that I've done is greenwashing is being looked at more and more. So you'll see that a lot of these things are really related here. Disclosure is ramping up. How people voluntarily, set climate-related targets, report on their climate risk. You really need to make sure that what you state you can back up with data, and that you're actually taking action from that corporate level to the asset level around what you're doing with your buildings and making them more operationally efficient and reducing your energy and water consumption. So it's going to be really important moving forward to take greenwashing in mind of how you're communicating all of that. I found a report that states 1 in 3 companies are being linked to greenwashing these days. I think a lot of that is outside the real estate industry, but there is litigation, and the litigation around greenwashing is increasing. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're developing your programs and making those changes at your asset level, that you're keeping track of things and you can accurately address and communicate what you're doing. ESG reporting frameworks, we can continue to see a consolidation of the reporting frameworks that you'll see here on the right, and continued push for industry-specific standards. I know a lot of people here are probably pretty well aware of GRESB, which I'll talk about in the next slide. GRI is still out there. GRI supports a lot of the frameworks that you'll see on the right that's been consolidated. TCFD, I know this was a element of last year, is now underneath ISSB. That everything now is under IFRS. So definitely consolidation. The message here is it's going to continue to evolve. And these reporting frameworks and how you report and what they're looking for is going to change. So you need to stay on top of how these things are evolving, how you need to report, what you need to report. And again, it kind of goes back to that greenwashing element. You need to make sure that what you're saying you're actually doing. I want to talk a little bit about some of the GRESB updates here that we saw. This is not the whole laundry list of GRESB updates, just ones that I thought were the most interesting and the ones that we can best support our clients on. Is they are scoring now for net zero target setting. So if you do have a net zero target, you can get scored for that, which is great. One of the big things that we saw that's creating a lot of kerfluffle, I guess, in the industry is the validity periods and expiration dates for building certification. So depending on if it's an interior certification, operating certification, or a building design and construction certification, your points are going to phase out over a certain number of years, and it's different for each one, but it's just something to look at. Luckily, a lot of the operating certifications like LEED, if you get an O&M certification, you have to renew after 3 years anyways, but GRESB is really looking at that of phasing those points out and not just having everything evergreen for the duration. EMS scoring. So before you could state that you had an EMS, but it didn't really have to be aligned to a standard or certified to anything. Now it must be aligned or certified to a standard such as ISO 14001. We know that certification is very, very expensive. It's exhausting. It's definitely a commitment. But aligning to ISO 14001 is a very doable thing and something that Kyle's supported a couple clients on. So very interesting there. The requirement to incorporate resiliency into climate strategy. So again, looking at making sure that those buildings are going to be resilient to all that crazy weather that's out there. And then, of course, a lot of people have heard about the new infrastructure standard and including being able to take credit for any buildings that are in development. So all those GRESB updates and anything moving forward, how can EBI support you? Of course, we can do that gap analysis and tell you where you need to improve. One of the big things that we're focused on is making sure that our clients have their EMS aligned to an ISO standard. Again, that's what Kyle's helped out a couple clients with already. Development of the policies, of course, establishing those targets and those roadmaps, conducting the property resilience assessment that I talked about a little bit before, having an idea of what the high risk climate elements are, but taking into consideration those property and site level attributes that may reduce your risk, or conversely, there could be some elements that may increase something that maybe one of those online reports didn't really pick up. We can do the energy decarbonization audits, develop pathways for you, roadmaps for you of how to reach your targets, identifying those energy conservation measures to reduce your energy consumption, and then actually help you implement that. So again, we can identify what needs to be done and then bring in the experts from across the company to help you execute those improvement elements. And one other item that I would just like to, I don't think the Energy Star always advertises the best, but they are making some updates and upgrades to the portfolio manager experience with the user interface, expanded emissions tracking and functionality. So that'll be good there. Being able to track building performance standards and your progress towards those standards, tracking of refrigerants and SE and RECs and the Spanish language option, which is always great. And so one of the things that Energy Star, does, really well is to, store all that data, highlight how your property is doing from that benchmarking perspective. But at the end of the day, it's still not going to give you an idea of what you need to do to actually reach those targets. So again, this is how EBI can support. We can do that analysis for you and identify what needs to be done. Develop an energy management program for you to include tenant engagement. We know tenants, depending on the property type, are a critical piece in reducing your energy consumption now and into the future. So doing those energy audits, decarbonization audits, developing that roadmap for you so that you can have a very clear idea of what needs to be done, through your hold period. One of the things along those lines is, again, implementing the ECMs and making sure that we do what makes sense for you, excuse me. So with that, I think that I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to get to what I think a lot of people are here for, and talking about the SEC disclosure and some of the regulatory transition risk elements.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tara. Yeah, let's get into the fun stuff that everyone loves discussing, and that's regulations. Next slide, please. So I want to start off talking about kind of general transition risks and what we do here at EBI. There are really four categories of transition risk. There are policy and legal risks, there's technological risks, there's market risk, and there's reputational risks. What we do here at EBI is we focus on that regulatory risk for our client, and that really comes up a lot in the form of benchmarking and building performance ordinances. So you really have to have the benchmarking, and then many jurisdictions will kind of build on that and add these building performance standards. There's already 50 jurisdictions nationwide that have some type of ordinance at the state and municipal level. So states like California, Massachusetts, Washington, New Jersey, they all have benchmarking requirements. But the real driver of these ordinances are the cities. It's at the municipal level. So cities like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, all have benchmarking and then building performance requirements. And what this means for our clients is they really need to understand how they are involved in this environment and what the existing and pending regulatory programs are and what they mean for their properties. And we can help do that by completing a transition risk assessment, where we will look at a portfolio nationwide and provide them with a report of where they have properties that are in compliance jurisdictions. And this helps them maintain that compliance at a state or municipal level. Federal we'll get to later with the SEC. And then it helps with the integrate into their portfolio and their asset level planning, so you can kind of understand where those hotspots are across the country and where you really need to focus your planning. And then it's also important to the bottom line, because no one wants to get a fine that they did not know was coming. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to talk about an example of what one of these ordinances look like. So in 2017, Los Angeles launched the existing building energy and water efficiency program. So this is one of those two-step programs of benchmarking and building performance standards. So annually, building owners of commercial and multifamily properties over 20,000 square feet must benchmark their energy and water use. So you would submit that to Energy Star and then disclose it to the city, and then tenants, potential buyers, or lessees can have access to that information and understand what that building's energy and water use is like. And so that's every year. And then they have a secondary requirement, and this is on a 5-year schedule. So that's going to be depending on the building ID, and that is going to require energy and water auditing and then retro commissioning. So essentially, it's going to take a deeper dive into how the property uses its energy and water, and figure out a way that it can more efficiently use those systems. So the energy audit is kind of like the first step, and then retro commissioning is the implementation phase. And then all of this information has to be submitted to the city, and the city will check to see if all of those updates have been complied with. So that's going to happen at a 5-year schedule. And it's this idea of continual improvement. So you want to constantly be thinking about ways you can improve your building's efficiency. Next slide, please.
I think we have a poll here. Leah, if you want to launch the transition risk poll, now that you have an idea of what transition risk is, if you didn't already. We'd like to understand, do you have full portfolio visibility regarding transition risk, as Kyle has defined here? No, and you don't know. Okay. That's again pretty typical of what we're seeing. And a lot of our clients are looking at transition risk during acquisition due diligence, and may not be looking at it in their operating portfolio. So having that full portfolio transition risk view is really going to be helpful to Kyle's point of understanding what you're up against. So, okay, great, thank you. Oops.
And so this is obviously the big story of the last month. On March 6th, the SEC finally promulgated its long-awaited climate disclosure rule. It is a watered-down version of the rule that was proposed back in 2022. And the big change there is that there's now no longer a Scope 3 disclosure requirement. However, for accelerated filers and large accelerated filers, so that would be any firm with a market float over $70 million, will have to disclose their material Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and that will begin in a phased-in process. And then on top of that, certain assurance requirements will be phased in as well. And then the SEC really looked at what investors had been asking for in certain disclosures and tried to put that together into this rule. So what they're looking at is a company's governance and oversight of their material climate-related risks. And I'm going to be using that word material a lot. I will explain that in a little more detail in a moment. And then the material impact of the climate risks and the strategies, and then the material risks of and how those risk management processes are handled internally, and then material climate goals and targets. So the rule uses that word material a lot. And so it's a legal term of art, essentially, that is going to be defined by the substantial likelihood that a reasonable shareholder would consider this important in deciding how to vote or make other investment decisions. So that's the frame of work that firms are going to have to look at whether they determine materiality. So it's this idea of a reasonable shareholder. And that might be different from firm to firm, but I do foresee that ending up in court and being further defined as to what a reasonable shareholder is in terms of this rule. And that also leads to the legal challenges of this case, or of this rule. And there are many. It's facing challenges from all sides, from states, from environmental and industry groups. Last week, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals out of New Orleans issued a temporary pause on the rule. They did not expand or give a reason why. It's just put on hold. And this is in addition to 25 states filing challenges to the rule in different circuit courts across the country, the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 11th U.S. circuits. And then additionally, the Sierra Club has also filed a challenge to the rule in the DC Circuit Court. And they are looking at it from a bit of a different angle by arguing that the rule is substantially different from the rule that was proposed back in 2022 by the removal of those Scope 3 emissions. So there's going to be a lot of different things happening with the rule moving forward based on these legal challenges. Many of them will likely be consolidated into a single case as this moves forward. But it is important to know that just because this rule has been brought into the judicial process, it's still important to prepare for what happens. So the rule might come out in a different form. It might come out exactly the same, or another court may allow the implementation while these cases are working their way through the courts. So it's important to be prepared and understand the requirements of the rule and be ready for implementation really as soon as all of this kind of shakes out. Next slide, please. And this put together just kind of a chart of highlighting how the implementation is going to be phased in. So it would begin for large accelerated filers in fiscal year 2025. So that would mean the first filing would have to take place in 2026. And it's about those disclosures that I mentioned before about climate risk governance and that type of information. And then different layers of disclosure will be phased in at different times and for different sized firms. So this is at present how implementation will look, but again, this all may change based on what happens with these numerous legal challenges. Next slide, please. And not to be left behind, the state of California last year also passed legislation for climate disclosure. In SB 253 and 261. It is very similar to the SEC climate disclosure rules. However, this does include scope 3 emissions. So it is a stricter form of disclosure than would be required with the SEC. And it's not really a surprise, but this also faced a legal challenge. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce brought a legal challenge against both of these pieces of legislation, and they are now also on hold. So it is important to know that these two cases are going to be very interlinked, and one is going to affect the other moving forward. But again, like I said before, it is important to be prepared and ready just in case these come out and there's no changes and the implementation starts, say, in 2026. So it's worth keeping an eye on, but better safe than sorry. Next slide, please.
Okay. I think we've got one more poll here for the group. With all that said and everything that you heard, is everyone ready for the regulations and compliance? No, maybe, yep, maybe. Yeah, a lot of uncertainty, and we understand that with all of the new regulations coming out, there's quite a bit of uncertainty. Okay, great. Well, we'll go on just for really quickly before we get to any Q&A, a couple case studies. The first one here is we had a client that was getting pressure from one of their customers around setting some greenhouse gas emission targets and getting those validated by the Science Based Target Initiative's SBTI. This is very, commonplace in a lot of, other industries around, making sure that these larger companies have visibility into their supply chain. So our client was a supplier to a larger company, and they were being, asked, or I would say encouraged, forced to set some of these targets. So the company, our client, didn't really know what to do, where to start, and all of that. So luckily, they had a pretty small portfolio of leased buildings that they operated out of. So we did a quick assessment of their energy utility bills to look at their scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions to determine what that baseline is of how they're using resources from the last couple of years. We looked at that and then decided based off of that what a target should be. That's in alignment with the SBTI global standards, and we helped them facilitate the submission of the SBTI of the target, and was able to get it validated through SBTI. So a great success there of establishing a target and getting it validated on a very constrained schedule. And what we're doing for them now is we provided them with an action plan of, okay, now that you have this target, what now? How are you going to be communicating those targets? What are you going to have to do in order to meet that target? So that's what we're working with them right now to determine that roadmap based off of the action plan that we gave them to communicate that target and meet the target. And then Kyle's going to talk about another one here around transition risk.
Yeah, so we have a client who has a large national portfolio of different leased and owned spaces. And they also have an internal corporate goal of net zero that they would like to meet in the future. And there are also different divisions within the company that are kind of working towards these same goals. So we were able to come in and help organize their thinking and create a plan and a path forward. And we started doing that with what we would recommend for everyone is a transition risk assessment. And so we looked at their entire portfolio across the country and determined whether these properties were in a compliance jurisdiction and what those compliance requirements are. If it was benchmarking or if it was benchmarking plus the building performance standards. And then we went ahead and started moving forward with the benchmarking and worked with the client to develop an energy program that they can implement across the country that will help with energy efficiency to meet the regulatory performance standards, but also their corporate goals. So they kind of work hand in hand in working all towards that same goal. And then this allowed our client to come up with a standardized process and procedures internally so they can now plan for audits, budgeting, different operational upgrades. And it all really started from looking at what those regulatory requirements were. And that whole program grew from there. So small things can have very, very large impact in this field.
Very, very true. Well, we have concluded the material here today, so we will open it up for questions. Again, please use the Q&A function that's in the Teams function here, and we can answer any questions that y'all may have. And Leah has also launched the rating of the webinar. We would like to get your feedback on if you found this to be helpful for you or not. And if you have any feedback, Kyle and my email is here on the last slide here. We will be sending out a copy of these slides, I believe, to all the registered participants so that you can reference it. And again, if you have any questions around how some of these services could benefit you, there's a conversation around, where you're at. We are more than happy to get on the phone or come to you and have a meeting to discuss it. Any questions out there? Did people leave, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't see the Q&A function, definitely feel free to use the chat too. Some people have different functions based off of the computer or phone that they're using to dial in. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, not seeing anything in the chat. Oh, there we go. Meetings, SEC requirements, what is projected framework to use for carbon accounting? I still think that's the greenhouse, the
greenhouse
GHG.
gas, GHG will be used for the carbon accounting. And then most of the climate risk is built off of TCFD. So those are still the two really main pillars.
GHG protocol, yes.
Yeah. That the SEC used to create this rule.
All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any other, oh, someone's typing, I'll wait. Or maybe not. There we go. Can portable solar products saving on carbon emissions be measured and sold as carbon offsets? Potentially. Depends on how you're measuring it. Yeah, we believe that on-site solar, and, you know, carbon offsets, even RECs are gonna be part of, part of the solution here. But, reducing your expenditure is the first step. But, yes, it actually, you know, definitely could be, just depending on how it's set up and the local standards as well. We've seen a lot of the local interconnection, items that impact how things could be measured and sold as potential carbon offsets. All right, Kyle, another question on that SEC chart here. When would a firm require to submit the GHG calculations to the SEC 2027 based off of 2026 data?
So that is going to depend on the firm's size. So we can go back. Yeah. So for again, it's material scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So again, that word material is very important to keep in mind here. But so for large accelerated filers, which is firms that have a float at the end of the year of over 700 million, that will be required for fiscal year 2026 and won't be required to be filed until 2027. But then for the accelerated filer group, which is the
250
public,
to 700.
yeah, 250 to 700 million, that has a disclosure timeline of 2028, so won't have to be filed until 2029. So there still is a lot of runway there before those get rolled out. And again, so depending on the size of your firm.
All right, great. Any other questions? We only have a couple minutes left here. But yeah, Lee, if you want to unmute for the last few here that are in here, if anyone would like to speak up, say anything, and have any other questions that they're easier to ask verbally. All right, well, if not, appreciate everyone's time in joining us today. Open to feedback, and definitely reach out to Kyle and I if you have any other questions. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great Wednesday.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.